So good evening, Simon Jacobson. I welcome all of you here and online. And as I said, living with the times, which has many meanings, but specifically now, suddenly, or maybe it's not so suddenly, but the recent headlines of the turmoil, upheavals in the Middle East, I thought appropriate to address that topic. Especially, I've received many requests from people who wanted to hear some perspective on it. Obviously, the news is covering it on a daily basis with all the different angles and the different journalists and reporters and pundits and bloggers and so on. So I don't have to necessarily weigh in on the immediate implications of the actual news that you could pick up anywhere. And rather, I will speak about put things in context and perspective. Because, the first, the most obvious thing is this, that this is a region, when I mean this, the Middle East is a region that is not new to conflict. It goes back, perhaps like no other place in the world, there's been more battles and more wars and fights than any other area anywhere in the world. Whether it's around Jerusalem and Israel, or it's in general that Middle Eastern region where the cradle of civilization was born, and all the elements of that create that volatility that is nothing new today. So in truth is, when you really think about it, especially in bigger context, deeper context, it is not so surprised that the Middle East is yet again in turmoil. Clearly there are fundamental elements that are not at peace with each other, and that's going to be some of what I'd like to address. But I want to say a few things just off the bat that comes to mind. When the Western journalists, the first ones, came to China in 1971, so they asked Zhou Enlai, who was then the first prime minister of the People's Republic of China, they asked him what his opinion was about the American and French revolutions. To which he replied, it's too early to tell. Because obviously Chinese civilization is going for thousands of years, and what we take so seriously in the Western world is relatively a few centuries old. It's like a spring chicken compared to the context of history. Well, we Jews have similar attitude. It's hard to not get distracted by the immediate impact of events, because at that moment you want to know what should be done, should we be concerned, what will happen to Israel, what will happen in other parts of the world as a result of a particular challenge or particular upheaval. So though that has to be addressed, the short-term immediate elements of what's happening, but it's also critical to look at the bigger picture. Think of it from a medical perspective. When someone comes, God forbid, to a doctor and they have a problem or a pain or some blood, or there's an open wound, so obviously the first thing is you have to get it under control and stop the bleeding and just stabilize the situation, the present situation. But any good doctor also knows that you have to get to the root of the problem, or else it will come back again and again. So there's called symptomatic medicine and there's root medicine. Symptomatic medicine, you deal with the symptoms. You try to remedy whatever you can. Sometimes that may be enough. A painkiller or something sometimes takes the problem away. But very often, especially deeper issues, are not just resolved with a quick fix. So when you're dealing with a region that has so much volatility, as I said, and so much history, it's obviously whatever can be done immediately to minimize the damage or minimize any type of crisis that can affect more than just the local area has to be attempted. But clearly there's much bigger issues going on in the Middle East. So in that context, as we'll see, if you really understand the bird's eye view of history, and you go back and look at the big picture of how do we get to this place in the first place, it helps put perspective, and also helps us learn how to deal with challenges like this. One other thing I want to say at the outset before we get into specifics is the following. And that's regarding Israel and its security. I adamantly disagree with Thomas Friedman, who wrote today in the New York Times, that Israel should ignore this whole situation and forge ahead as if nothing happened and create a peace with the Palestinians. For all the reasons that he writes, because if not, there'll be an apartheid state and so on and so forth. Why do I adamantly disagree? Not because I don't want peace. And remember, from a Jewish perspective, from a Torah point of view, there's no greater blessing than peace. So we all want peace. And for that matter, I should add to the equation this statement: peace does not just mean peace for Jews, and Jews should survive. Peace means peace for everybody. From a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective, life is sacred. Every life is sacred, whether it's a Jewish life, whether it's a Muslim life, whether it's a Christian life, whether it's an atheist life. Life is sacred, and therefore, shedding of blood or converse, peace is a blessing for all human beings, not just for Jews. So, as opposed to what some people have, the stereotype that the Jews think only about themselves, meaning, we want to have peace and we don't really care about anyone else, it's absolutely not correct. From the beginning of time, from Abraham through the Torah, through Moses and so on, it was always the aspiration was peace on this earth. Peace for all human beings, not just peace for one group or for one particular individual. So that's a given. So what's my disagreement? You could say, who am I to disagree with the great Thomas Friedman, who helped us discover that the globe is flat and so on? Well, he's got his own agenda. What I disagree is basically a fundamental issue that until this is resolved, you'll never have resolution in this region. And this brings me to the bigger picture. And that is the issue of how the Arab world, the Arab Muslim world, looks at the state of Israel, looks at Israel in general. It's one thing that if you have a people who have accepted the fact that Israel is there to stay and the Jews are there to stay, but that fact has not been accepted. And many people don't even know why. In the West, we are spoiled. We have no context and no concept of religious passion. Because there's no religious passion in this country. Now here we live in a Western world. Yes, there are religious people, and some people have a lot of fervor. But real religious passion, you have to go to the Middle East in our times to find passion. Religious passion is driven by all kinds of different standards, not by money and not by power, but by sometimes misplaced faith. And the fact of the matter is, the reason that 1.4 billion Muslims have a problem with Israel is not because they're anti-Semitic necessarily. It's because it's a desecration of their faith that there's a land called Israel sitting amidst Arab territory. If you don't need to be a Muslim scholar to know that the concept of jihad, whether it's bloody war or not, is the idea that Islam is the superior religion, and when they conquered a country, the reason that they built mosques on all the holy sites, because it was a symbol of Islam's superiority over previous two religions, Christianity and Judaism. I did a little in-depth study of Islamic theory right after September 11th, because I was very intrigued by the fact that the people who blew up the planes in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and so on were religious individuals, and not only religious individuals, documents were found in their belongings that were all about what they were reading the night before. Now they were doing other things the night before too, but they also were reading these religious doctrine. And they were reading statements that when you read it, it's quite chilling because it doesn't talk about death. It talks about serving God. It's all about serving God. That when you are dedicated to God, you have to ignore and overlook your own feelings and sentiments and emotions, and you have to do what God wants. And it's all about dedication to God. This is what they were reading the night before that gave them so-called courage or whatever it is. So it wasn't a bunch of violent criminals that were just slept out of some prison and said, go blow up a World Trade Center. So people whose on the religious part of them was the one that was driving them, not their violent part, which is something that's very unique. You don't find that in the United States. You don't find religious people blowing up buildings. You find violent people blowing up buildings, people for a cause, or whatever it may be. But then I dug further. I wanted to see who are the godfathers, who are the gurus and the teachers of these scholars, especially of what they call Islamic fundamentalism. And I guarantee you what I'm going to say most of you have never heard, even though it lies at the root of all the issues. Because it's not really popular. And we know, we just want to know, like Americans like to say, just don't bomb us, leave us live, and that's it. And many Israelis say the same thing. But what is the root? What is the root of why a bunch of young people would be willing to go to commit suicide, to kill other people and themselves? It's one thing in the history you've motivated people to kill others, but never to kill yourself in the process. All of war, you motivate soldiers and so on to kill others, but they never go on suicide missions. I mean, you have rare occasions, the kamikazes and so on. So clearly here it requires a lot more of indoctrination than just plain fighting for a cause. So everyone knows Bin Laden, right? And his cronies. These are scholarly people. They went to colleges. They're not illiterate. They're highly educated, some of them in the best colleges of the United States. They come from wealth. They're not poverty-stricken, so it's not coming from desperation because they're angry at the system because they're poor. They're coming from success and knowledge and information. So what inspired them? So here's the story. The father of modern, what we call Muslim fundamentalism, radical fundamentalism, is a man called Ibn Khattab. Qutb is how it's spelled. He was executed, believe it or not, in Egypt in 1968 by Nasser. President Nasser was the president of Egypt. President Nasser was a secular pan-Arabist, as they've called him. He was an Arab and a Muslim and all that, but he was on a secular, not a religious one. He executed Khattab because he felt his theories, his ideas were too inciting, instigating. Very similar to what Mubarak, the current president, has banned what they call the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, which is, they say, the next force coming to power if Mubarak falls out of power. Similar idea. So what does Khattab write? Khattab wrote I'm not sure how many volumes, maybe 40, 50 volume commentary on the Quran. Okay. So from a Jewish perspective, we understand what means writing 40 volumes on a book, and we've written a lot more, but he wrote a very extensive commentary. And here's the summary of his philosophy, which is not his own. It's based on Muslim thinking, but he takes it, of course, to an extreme. And he is the inspiration behind thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of millions of people. Not all necessarily follow his call to violence, but many do. And it's a very seductive and very powerful philosophy. And I begin with that because by understanding this, you'll understand a lot of things can be understood from what he writes. And I'm not exaggerating what I'm going to say now. What he says is the following. That God created the world for a purpose. The purpose is to take a mundane material world and turn it into a spiritual environment. And doing that, you do that through God's laws. Those laws were given to us at Sinai, to Moses. Prior to that, there was the prophet Abraham, there were other prophets, and Moses formalized, this is all him writing. So far, so good. We all agree with that. And God gave a plan of how this should be lived up to. He chose the Jewish people as his agents and ambassadors to fulfill this purpose in existence. However, they failed. They failed. Initially, they accepted this mission, this mandate, but then they became corrupt. This is what he writes, and therefore they failed. And as a result, God then chose 1,000 years later Christians. And he considers Jesus as a prophet as well, the Muslims consider. And he tried a different group of people who were inspired by the same ideas that the Torah offers, but they try to start anew without corruption in a healthy way. The Christians failed even more miserably, is what he writes. So 700 years later, God chose a man called Muhammad, the prophet. 700 years after Christianity was born is when Muhammad is the 7th century, 6th, 7th century, and 8th century. And Muhammad came to the plains of Arabia, Saudi Arabia today, and introduced, God chose a new group of people that they should try to fulfill that which the Jews did not and the Christians did not. And he says, from then on began the growth of Islam, which takes the best from Judaism, the best of Christianity, and adds to it another sacred dimension. We're going to get into the differences of the philosophies. But now Muslims are charged with that which God gave the Jewish people in the beginning. Now Muslims have that mission. And that mission is to travel all over the world and convert and proselytize and do whatever it takes to make the world listen to God. So that's how it was. The Jews failed, the Christians failed, now it's the Muslims' turn. And they did so for several centuries. The growth of the Ottoman Empire, and Islam grew tremendously. You know, today, as I said, today's the fastest growing religion, just for the record. It's the fastest growing religion, and it spread obviously starting from the Middle East, but it spread then to Africa and to the East, all the way to Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country, by the way, of all countries. A Muslim is not necessarily an Arab is not necessarily a Muslim, just also for the record. Arabs is more of a regional thing, Muslims is a faith thing. So, bottom line, it spread, and now it's continuing to spread. You go to Europe, I was in Europe 2 weeks ago in London. Within 10, 20 years, most of Europe is probably going to be Muslim majority. Maybe a little longer, maybe shorter, depends. There could always be changes. But let's put it this way, the march of progress from their perspective goes on. Now here's where it gets interesting. So Khattab continues and writes that this is our mission. But something happened. The Ottoman Empire, which built, by the way, the mosque on the Temple Mount, and the two mosques on the Temple Mount, and many others, the Ottoman Empire then was humiliated in defeat by World War I, and they were broken apart. And this he considers to be the first setback, so to speak, the first major setback of the Western world, the Christian world, conspiring with the Jews. That's why you keep hearing always from them, you hear the Crusaders and the Jews. Why they keep bringing up the Crusaders and the Jews? Every time you read about, you hear the hate mongering and the sermons. You always hear about the Crusaders and the Jews. The Crusaders are the Christians that did exactly the same thing in the early part of in the early centuries, right? The Second Crusade, the First Crusade, the Second Century, the Third Century, and so on. And he said the Western world then humiliated the Muslim world and basically took away from them all their power. He says the Ottoman Empire gave civilization unbelievable art, music, faith, philosophy, and it's true, they did. Some of the greatest thinkers in the Middle Ages come from the Muslim world, and now they took it all away, and they want to turn us back into a third world country, to go back with camels and donkeys. That's what they say. That's what Khattab writes. I'm not going to go again into a whole elaboration, but it's all relevant, as you'll see in a moment. And he says that's what they wanted us to do. But then God blessed us with oil, and God blessed us with power. So we came back. It's interesting, if Saudi Arabia did not have oil, if the Middle Eastern countries had no oil, they would be a third world country in Africa as significant as a country like Somalia or as Congo. But because of the oil, obviously, the West needs their oil. So it's an interesting hashgacha pratis, as they say, divine providence. But Khattab continues and says, and therefore, our goal now is to reclaim the dignity of what God wants of the Ottoman or the Muslim world, to teach the entire world what it means to be godly. That's the mission. And the world, especially the Western world, has become decadent in its prosperity. It's become a world that is busy indulging in their own pleasures. He actually came to visit the United States, and that's when he became even more anti-West. He saw streets in Manhattan, all over the country, in Hollywood and so on, that indulge, he says, in their own self-glorification. Everything antithetical to God. So it only cemented his beliefs and ideas that the Muslim world has come to save the universe. Now, till this point, there's a lot. If you read, a lot of his points are extremely, as I said, very, very seductive, very correct even, and very appealing. This is what has inspired a generation of Muslim radicals. They're not just some people who are like backwards and want to just kill people. They have a real mission. Now, is it completely pure and godly? Obviously, there's other agendas as well. It's always that way. But don't dismiss it as some type of like what many people want to do, is some type of crazy people or something. They're very solidly philosophically based. Now, of course, where it gets more chilling and uglier is when Khattab calls for a real jihad, for a real war, and not just a peaceful transition. He could have concluded that fine, Muslims have to influence the world, but you do so peacefully. You do so through education, through inspiration, through spiritual retreats, whatever it is. But that's not what he writes. He does call for violent action, because that's the only way he thinks is going to work. And of course, he cannot resist showing some of his anti-Semitic face. So he says some things about Jews also that are quite irrational, actually. But the bottom line is that this is what inspires a whole generation. Now, I'm not going to say that 1.4 or whatever amount is billion Muslims all abide by Khattab's thinking, but they're much closer to his thinking than they are to our thinking. Let's put it that way. So if you have over a billion and almost 1.5 billion people thinking a certain way, and all you have to do is turn on Al Jazeera and see what happens by the 5 times a day when they bow, and across the board, secular or religious Muslims, all bow these 5 times a day. You see that this is a force that's not going away so quickly, just because you have firepower. So then let's think about Egypt for a moment in that context. So basically what happened was America, with its money, has basically bought and is able to keep this radicalism at bay. The money of the Saudi princes keeps Saudi Arabia at bay. They say the whole Saudi Arabia is controlled, millions and millions of people, by 7,000, a family of 7,000 total. Because they control the oil, they control the money. So money really is glossing over and masking the fermentation that's going on beneath the surface that is popping up in our eyes as terrorism here and there, the attacks against Israel. And mind you, among the Muslims itself, there's plenty of disagreements. There's the Sunnis and there's the Shiites. It's not like they're all on the same page. But one thing they do agree on the same page is that their philosophy has to dominate. So don't think it's an accident that Muslims are proliferating across Europe. Now, mind you, I don't want to sound like some type of racist, and I think all Muslims are bad, and it's like but there's a root of philosophy here that is missing, and the only time it gets our attention is when there is a flare-up, when there's either a terrorist attack, God forbid, or now, a crisis in the Middle East. Why do you think it's spreading from Tunisia, through Egypt, through Jordan, and probably through all the other countries there? It's not just Facebook and Twitter. Those are the tools. You can spread Facebook and Twitter is also spreading a lot of viral stuff in the United States. You're not getting people coming out to march because there's no cause here. There is a cause. So of course technology has sped up the process, but technology didn't create this the unrest. It just allowed it to escalate. So it would have popped up one way or another somewhere. Maybe technology is in this case a blessing. So what we're faced with, if you really want to look at it beyond the surface, and that's why I so adamantly disagree with Thomas Friedman and a lot of other people, they are very myopic. They look at the surface level, they think, you know what, let's just find some way to make peace with somebody and everything's going to go away. You're not talking about going away. You're talking about fundamental problem. Israel is a fundamental problem in the Muslim world. It has nothing to do with necessarily anti-Semitism. Maybe some of it is anti-Semitic. You know what the problem is? Israel is smack in the middle of Arab territory that demonstrates how Islam conquered all that land. How could there be one country that's not under Islam power? Now, when you hear that, you're not going to hear that. It's not politically correct for anyone to say that, because then if that's the case, then there's how could you ever possibly make peace? Well, you know something, maybe that's why there is no peace. You think that if a Palestinian state is created tomorrow in Israel, there's suddenly peace? The exact opposite. Look what happened in Egypt. Even if you paid the Palestinians, even if you bought them off, like in Egypt, $1.2 billion that the United States gives Mubarak, even if you bought them, what? 1.6. Okay, who's counting? Right, fine. Even if you buy them off, you cannot, they're talking about too many people. Now, what would be a long-term solution? A long-term solution, if you could re-educate Muslims to understand that Israel and Jews are in the same boat like them, that we also think about God and we also think about changing the world, that may be a long-term solution. But nobody talks about that because the Western world hates bringing God into the picture. Anytime someone says it's a religious war, you never hear anyone wants to say that because it's too frightening. Everyone wants to believe that religious wars are behind us. Religious wars are the time for the Middle Ages. There's no religious wars today. It's absolutely untrue. All of Islam is a religion. It's not some. What are they fighting for? Do you think they're fighting for territory? Think of September 11th. Okay, it's unprecedented that anyone would attack another country without going to war. Why would a few people blow up some planes in the World Trade Center? Usually in the past, you'd think that was like the prelude, the beginning of an invasion. So, like let's say Pearl Harbor, and then Japan goes to attack the rest of the country. What was their gain? They weren't suddenly planning to bring 1 million soldiers into the United States and at war. Even Hitler and the Germans, as despicable as they were, they had a goal. They wanted to control land. And they fought for land, and they conquered land. First the Sudetenland, then Czechoslovakia, then Poland, then Russia. They were going to go all over. Then France on the other end, Northern Africa. Very clear. What do Muslims want? What did they want when they blew up the World Trade Center? Think about it. So the only way we could, in our television American mind mentality, we think, they wanted to make noise. No, they wanted to give a black eye to the Western world to show that we're not going away, that we are going to attack your so-called icons. And they're going to attack your lifestyle, your security. Look what they've done to our airports, to flights. We now it's become already, we're accustomed to it. But imagine we wouldn't have to stay on the lines altogether for security, thank God it hasn't spread everywhere, because if you think about it, I don't even want to mention it. Every tunnel, every bridge is vulnerable any given moment. Nobody's checking anything. They want to attack the free lifestyle of the West. It's very methodical and it's very planned. It wants to disrupt the Western world's decadence. Now again, I'm not suggesting that they're all so holy and godly, but it's driven by those type of principles. And those are very hard to fight. Because every Friday, I've read some of the translations of the speeches given in mosques on Fridays, including in Israel. You'll not believe what you hear. If anyone said that in English, they'd be like, they'd be so excommunicated. They're so politically incorrect. They say the worst things you can imagine. It's common that every Friday they will say Jews come from apes and monkeys, which is a statement from the Quran. It's common in almost every speech given by an imam in a mosque in Israel, and probably across the Arab world. I've monitored them all. We'll always mention that. What would happen if a Jewish leader in America got up and said that Muslims are apes and monkeys? Or anyone, for that matter, or the president. It's unheard of. But they say it in Arabic. So number one is you could always, feign I don't understand the language, and I don't even want to know what they say. Or you say, okay, they're crazy. They're a third world country. That's how they speak. It's much more complicated than that. It's driven by religious beliefs. Now, if you took Islam, just like Christianity once was a wild religion, as I said, the Crusades wreaked more violence across Europe, across the world, than all the Muslims put together. But there came a point where Christianity was tamed. The United States was founded by Christians. However, they weren't crusaders. They were deists. They were people who gleaned out of Christianity the elements that are very, very admirable. Basically, the Torah elements. Like I pointed out many times here in this class, the Torah elements. There's a book by a guy called a scholar, Michael Novak, On Two Wings. He's a Christian scholar. And he writes how the Republic of the United States is based on what he calls Jewish metaphysics, Torah. He uses the word Torah, not Bible. And he demonstrates it through letters from John Adams and from Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and the Thomas Paine, the whole founding fathers, letters from them, how they write about the principles of this country. All you need to look is at the Declaration of Independence. Where's the root of the Declaration of Independence? It's the foundation of this entire country. It states the following: all men are created equal. Maybe they should have written all people are created equal, but that's what they wrote. And they write all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. For therefore, every human being, the pursuit of freedom, happiness, and way of life, whatever the expression there is. Where is this principle is critical. They use the word created equal. They don't write born equal, are equal. They specifically cite a creator. And they continue and says that the Creator endowed everyone with unalienable rights. This is essentially a translation, if you want, of the Torah itself. The Torah starts off in the beginning. It says every human being was created in the divine image. As a result, life is sacred. And no human being, no monarch, and no pope, and no leader can take away the basic human rights that God gave every human being. This is the essence of the whole Torah. It's the essence of the whole Torah. Every law is driven by it in one way or another. And that's why the respect for other people and so on. The founding fathers, who were Christians, realized, and they did it in a very mild way, so Christianity ends up becoming a force that created a country like this that has plenty of problems, but its foundational principles are extremely rare and unique. And remember, put it in context, in history, before the United States, there was no country that had such principles. Europe was controlled by monarchs and by, as I said, by the church. The Eastern world, China and Japan and India, were all controlled by dictators and monarchs. Once in a while there was a benevolent despot, as they put it, a benevolent leader. So he happened to be nice, but that was based on his whim. Most were not. It was the United States that was the first one that institutionalized in a government form a structure that there's no human being that's more powerful than another in the sense of equality in the eyes of God. It's a complete Torah principle. The Crusaders that were persecuting Europe, the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, Christian persecution through the ages, did not have that element. Islam also has beautiful concepts like that because they also come from the Torah. Remember, these are all children of Abraham, and Abraham taught this principle, basic. Lasis Daka Mishpat. A man that built a family dedicated to God and dedicated to a path of justice and righteousness and virtue. And then, over the generations, it got messed up. So if everybody were to go back and say, Av HaMoin Goyim, we say Abraham is the father of all nations. If all nations would align themselves back to Abraham's vision, you would have a world of peace. And even both Muslims, Christians, and surely Jews, all embrace that vision. So there's plenty of work cut out for us. So meanwhile, we have a situation where there is Islam is similar to, I would say, like 12th century Christianity today. They still have not matured. The religious passions are powerful. They don't know how to deal with a secular world. So for many of them, the only way to deal with it is to go to war with it. It's not uncommon. I'll just give you an example, even though I don't want to compare it, but as they say, bedakus, subtle example. There was a great sage, his name was Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. He had to escape from the Romans, who came over the Western world, the Romans who later would become the Christians. And he hid in a cave for 12 years. It's a whole story in the Talmud. We honor it and bless it and celebrate it rather on Lag BaOmer, the period right between Passover and Shavuos. In Miran there's all types of pilgrimages. And when he came out after 12 years, because the decree was over, the Romans stopped, let go. He was such a spiritual state of mind that the Talmud says that wherever he would go, whatever he would look at would begin to burn, physically or metaphorically, because his spiritual state, his evolved state of 12 years of being secluded, studying, praying, and so-called completely sublimating himself was such that when he started seeing people involved in petty things, petty fights and petty arguments and petty activities, and saw that they were not aspiring to more transcendental experiences, whatever he looked at began to burn. So God said to him, you'd think this was a virtue, right? Look how spiritual he was. God said, no. You're not mature enough. You have to go back for a 13th year. Bar mitzvah, a 13th year, and another year where you will learn that when you come out, wherever you go, you should repair it instead of burning it up. See, on one hand, you could say Rab Shimon Bar Yochai was on a very high, lofty spiritual level. The problem was he could not coexist with a world that wasn't that lofty. Think of it like a teacher. There are teachers, brilliant teachers, that can only teach brilliant students. What about a student who's not so brilliant, or is a beginner, or is not yet interested? What do you need? A more brilliant teacher for beginners, or a less brilliant one? Well, think about it. The more brilliant the teacher, the more they can reach people who are not in the same league. You see, the greatest teachers are the people who can find examples and metaphors and a way to communicate, even to people who are not yet so familiar with a particular topic. Comes to mind, Richard Feynman was a physicist of that caliber. Brilliant physicist, but his examples are so simple, deceptively simple, was able to explain complex quantum mechanics and physics to people who were beginners, even people who have no clue what it is. And then you begin to study, you start expanding and growing. So it takes a greater person to be able to not just tolerate, but also to refine their environment. Those of us that are impatient with others because we're so superior or feel we're so special, it's very nice, but greater people know what restraint is. So restraint and patience doesn't always mean weakness. It shouldn't be confused with weakness. Sometimes it's great strength. It's the strength of a parent or a father or a mother or a teacher who knows how to communicate, who knows how to pace it, spoon feed it, so to speak, so the student or the child can receive it and grow in the process. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was a great mystic and sage, but he did not yet have that element. It took one more year. So I just using this as an example. Religious passions and religious zeal is very powerful, but also very dangerous, because it sometimes does not know where to stop and doesn't know where to discipline itself. This is the fundamental problem of all religious fire. And some of us in the Western world like to say, you know what, let's get rid of religion altogether. That's what the atheists, the radical atheists are arguing, like Thomas Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and these type. They're almost as fanatical, maybe as fanatic as the religious people they criticize. That's another story. But because they say religion is the source of all evil, because it brings out these passions you're doing in the name of God. When you do something in the name of God, forget about it. You can't fight with someone who thinks that God told them to do it, because they're not fighting for themselves, they're fighting for God. But I beg to differ with that as well. There's a thing called the middle approach. Religious passion has also great strengths. Some of the greatest art, even music, and definitely creativity, has come out because of people who are looking for God. People like Abraham or Moses, and definitely in later generations, you find some of the most beautiful concepts of people searching the selflessness to look for a higher system, for a system that would transcend greed and self-interest and so on. Some of the most powerful concepts in civilization wouldn't be here today. Even the concept that the founding fathers captured, that all people are created equal, that we all have inalienable rights by God, that's a religious concept. Someone that doesn't have a God cannot promise such type of equality. I always ask my atheist friends whether they would give equality to believers and unbelievers as much as believers gave them. Would they be as tolerant? But you see, that's what belief is. Faith has unbelievable power. In the name of faith, people have saved lives. People have given their lives for children that everyone gave up on. Unbelievable, the nobility, the dignity, helping the sick, even situations where it's completely inconvenient for you. So to just dismiss it all and say because it's a fire that can be out of control is also wrong. It's like fire. Fire is maybe a good example. Fire, we cannot live with fire. We can't live without it in a way. What does that mean? The sun has to be exactly the distance that it is right now from the earth for it to give life to the earth. Should it be a little closer? It would burn everything up. Should it be a little farther? It would freeze everything. So fire is critical for life. We need warmth. We need the heat. We need the light. But it has to be the proper distance. Every fire is like that. Fire can consume and destroy, or fire can warm and nurture. So to argue because fire is destructive, let's eliminate all fire, you basically eliminate all life. That would be like we say about love. You say that love can be so destructive, and people have been hurt in love. If we eliminate all of love, there'd be no more problems. It's not how it works. Throw out the baby with the bathwater is not the way to go. So to go back to the theme of this whole discussion is, so we're living in the region called the Middle East, with Israel smack in the middle, is nothing new. It's battles that have been raging from the beginning of time. They just take on different shapes and forms. You have to forget about the headlines, what people exactly are yelling in the streets of Cairo. That's not the point. The point is that there's a fundamental clash going on. Is it going to be the people with money and power, or is it going to be a religious force at work? Is it going to be a dictator, but he's pro-West, or is it going to be a free democracy, and who knows who's going to rule? It may be uncontrollable passions. That's what everyone's afraid of. Who's going to come to power? And that's why Saudi Arabia can get away with the same thing. Besides the money, the West goes along with it because you never know who's going to rule. Bin Laden will take over. Someone that's going to say, let's go to war with the West. Here at least you have corrupt leaders, but they're not going to war with the West. Better than religious leaders who may not be so corrupt, but they're going to go to war with us. So this is like almost a no-win situation. How long can it hold, if you think about it? And if you're really open about it, it's quite depressing, because it doesn't seem like there's a solution. What exactly is going to be the solution? The West is not leaving its decadence, let's be very honest, right? New York or Hollywood is not exactly becoming more religious because the Muslims say we're decadent. The Muslims are not becoming less religious, even though I know people like Thomas Fried and others say give them enough computers and McDonald's and make peace with them, they're suddenly going to embrace the Western civilization. Absolutely not. Their agenda is very, very clear. And I'm not even saying it's a bad agenda. The agenda would not be bad if there was no violence. If Muslims were traveling around the world and getting on television and peacefully preaching a path of peace with God, that would be beautiful. The problem is that they've taken radical approaches. So there's some of their philosophies are very sound. But so we have ourselves really almost like two ends of the extreme, and there's no sane middle voice. Now you would have thought that Israel should be the same middle voice. Israel would have been, here's a Jewish nation. They've been through it all. Go back longer than the Christians and longer than the Muslims, and you'd think that you'd have here a balance. But unfortunately in Israel, sadly, is the same problem. The war between the secular and the religious. And the secular wanted to have at least a Mediterranean Riviera, basically. Leave us alone. But they're in a region where it doesn't work that way. They're a region surrounded by people and by nations and millions of people who will not accept a secular environment. And Israel is worse than them all because Israel is not even under Muslim control. That's why Israel is its enemy. That's why everything that happens in Israel will be attacked again and again by Muslims, one way or the other. Some in a radical way, some in a more quiet way, but it's the fundamental problem. Now, so the question is, did you come here to hear a doomsday scenario? You didn't have to come out here tonight. For me, obviously that's not where I want to lead to. And I better get to the good news before, right. They used to say that it's not. We shouldn't be learning. People shouldn't learn the God of the perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim, God of the perplexed of Maimonides, Rambam, because you may end up reading all the questions and falling asleep before the answers come, so you can remain perplexed. So I don't want to leave here. I want to stop right here with the negative and get to the positive, because you never know. So what's the positive? So the positive is like this. That all this has been foretold, and as I said, it's all playing out a scenario that has happened many, many times. And when you hear the whole scenario, actually is quite good news. It's not such bad news. It was always going to be a collision between modernity and faith, one way or another. Modernity takes on different shapes and forms. But here you have the story of Abraham. Abraham lived 3,800 years ago. Was a man who single-handedly pioneered a system called faith. He defied the pagan world, including his own parents. He had no religious institutions to follow. Maybe that was a blessing. He had to discover it on his own. And he did. So it says in what's called the famous Bris Ben Absarim. This is a covenant that God made with him at some point. This becomes a very fundamental covenant, commitment. They made a deal. So it says in the chapter, which is quite cryptic chapter, you can read it in the book of Genesis, Parsha Lech Lecha. I think it's around chapter 12 or something like that. So there, God makes, no, it's a little later, I'm sorry, not 12. It's God makes the covenant with him. So there's a story there. There's a scene that's described that remains mysterious when you read it. And I just want to read it and tell you what it says. Let me just find it. Okay. It's chapter 15, verse 12. That's why. 15, verse 11, 12, and so on. So it says, the sun was about to set, and a deep slumber fell on Abraham. And Vihine, and behold, there was a shudder and a darkness and a great darkness that consumed Abraham. That's the verse. And everyone wonders, what does this mean? Well, the sun set, a deep sleep, deep slumber, and then what is this ema, this tremble, this fear, darkness, and great darkness that befell Abraham. And then the next verse continues and says, this is where God tells Abraham, know well, your children will be strangers in a land, not theirs. They will be strangers in a land that's not theirs. And they will serve there for 400 years, and they will be persecuted. They'll be oppressed. But then, they will finally be redeemed, and they will leave with great treasure, with great wealth. Now this is obviously a prediction of the 400 years that the Jews would end up in the exile called Egypt. Strangers in a land that's not theirs. They'd become slaves and persecuted, oppressed, and then finally they would leave with great wealth. So God is telling Abraham what is going to happen. So there's a story here that if you think about it, it's really the story of every person's life, and it's really the story of history. I will apply this personally, but I want to first talk about it on a historical level. What's the story? The story goes like this. That Abraham now has found faith. He's found God. So you think, okay, now everything should be fine. No, but we live in a difficult world. Difficult world with people driven by self-interest, people who have different opinions, people who have different passions and commitments, people who search for power and money and other things. So the world is not going to be that easy to deal with. And what God is saying to Abraham, and that's what the Medrash says on this verse, that these words, from falling asleep, the darkness, the fear, the tremble, the Gedolah, refer to the great empires that are going to come in the future. And the Medrash says the empires are, obviously Egypt, that's the root of all empires, which is the Egyptian empire that comes in the next verse. But then there will be the Babylonian Empire, there'll be the Persian Empire, there'll be the Greek Empire, there'll be the Edomite, the Roman Empire, the Roman Christian Empire. And then there would be the Ishmaelite, the Muslim Arab Empire. This is states in Medrash in more than one place on this verse. The interesting thing is that if you start looking around, digging, you'll find these empires, these 4 or 5 empires mentioned in hundreds of places alluded to in the Torah. I'll give you another one. This week's chapter. It says in the Medrash like this. It says right in the beginning that the Jews should bring gifts, offerings. God commands Moses, tell the Terumah, take offerings from the Jews, donations basically, to build me a sanctuary. So this is the chapter where the great sanctuary, the Beit HaMikdash, the first one, the Mishkan, the portable one in the wilderness would be built. And in its model would later be built the first temple in Jerusalem and the second temple. So you understand its significance. It's not a small event. And I'll listen to this. So the Medrash says, what are the items that the Jews offered, donated? Gold, silver, copper. Then it continues on with different type of materials. And the Medrash says, gold, silver, copper. And Eris Ayolim Udamim, which means red skins from certain animal, from which animal? The red...
Teshila? Something like that.
No, that's Choshim. No, that's not it. No. Eris Ayolim Ayal, red... yeah, red skins from one of the family of is it ibex? No, they're not extinct. That's not this. This is a different. That's a different expression. That's not this one. That's Eris Choshim. That's another skin. I'm not talking about that one. Yeah. The ibex? Okay. I think it's called skins. Anyway, the Medrash says that these 4 items correspond to the same 4 empires. Gold, silver, copper is the Babylonian, the Persian, the Greek, and Eris al Yalim Udamim from the word Edom, red, is Edom, which is the Roman Empire. And then it continues, and this is the key thing, it says. So of course the big question is, how does that fit here? It's one thing in the vision of Abraham, he was being shown the generations to come, the empires to come, and he shuddered. Here we're talking about building the temple. As a matter of fact, the Babylonians and the Romans destroyed the temple. So why would they be alluded to and hinted to in items that build the temple? So the Medrash continues in Tanchuma, right here in this verse. It says like this, that then comes the next one, says Shemen Lamoyer, oil for the lamp. So the Medrash says that though you will be one day under the persecuted by the empires, these four empires, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman, which of course includes many others, including the Ishmaelite, the Muslim Arab empires, nevertheless, the goal of it all is that you will not just survive, you'll thrive. And out of it all will come Shem and Lamoyer, will come the light of redemption. Light onto nations. You will not only not be destroyed by these empires, you will become a great light to them and to the world. This is how the Medrash puts it. And the same thing is said to Abraham. Why did God show them the empires to come? Because He wanted to show him that yes, you're going to go through difficult times, but don't ever think that you will be destroyed by them. You will survive them all, they will die out, and you will become stronger and stronger. That's basically the message. So the real story going on here is the following. It's not, and we're not just talking about Jewish survival here, we're talking about which forces will ultimately prevail. There is a battle going on from the beginning of time between God and this universe. There's a real battle. The battle takes on many shapes and forms. Each of our lives are affected by this battle all the time. Every second that you make a decision in your life, whether you're going to take care of your own needs or help someone else, whether you're going to serve or you're going to take or you're going to give, whether you're going to be focused purely on narcissistic needs as opposed to giving to others, this is all the battle in one way or other between your soul and your body, or between God and this universe. The battles between religion, between faith and modernity, between science and reason, between faith and reason, science and religion. And I can give you the whole list. It's essentially a world that is wondering and trying to come to peace with a God, one way or another. There are people who fight for God, there are people who fight against God. Now what do I mean by God? Let's take away the word God for a moment and use the word for purpose. Does this life have a purpose or not? From the perspective of Judaism, of the Torah, life has a purpose. Now think for a moment, what would a machine that has a purpose, what would happen to it if it stops seeking its purpose? Or, even worse, it starts getting involved in things that are antithetical to its purpose. At some point, the machine is going to have to go through a major upheaval. So if the universe has purpose, and I say it only if as a skeptic, and God has given a design and purpose to go somewhere, and it does not make peace with that purpose, what do you think is going to happen? You think the world can be at peace? There's no way it can be at peace. The problem becomes, as I described earlier, the two extremes. Either you have people who are advocating God and essentially trying to destroy the secular world, or you have people who are advocating secularism and trying to destroy the religious world. So we have these two extremes today. Those are the most dominant voices that you hear. The middle voice of someone of restraint, of compassion, that says, no, we have to find our way, like Abraham taught. What did Abraham do when he met infidels? Using that word specifically, because that's what the Muslims use. Infidels. What did he meet?
He invited them to eat, he offered them food, and then he said either thank God or pay for the food.
And he prayed for the people of Sodom. Right. He bargained with God and tried to get God to have compassion on a city that everyone agreed was infidels. He didn't argue that they were not criminals. They were criminals, but he said that let's find some way to save them. Maybe they're 50 tzaddikim, whatever the calculations was. He wasn't successful. Was it because Abraham suddenly became soft-hearted and decided, let's be more liberal and we'll tolerate wicked people? Abraham was a strong guy, but he knew this power was to transform the world, not to destroy it. Let them do tshuva, find a way to inspire them. Just like I said with Rav Shimon Bar Yochai before. Of course, the easier path is to destroy everything in your path that doesn't agree with you. But that's not the path of Judaism. It says, shalom ba'elam. Maimonides brings in the end of Laws of Hanukkah, he says, the whole Torah was given to bring peace in the world. Now he doesn't just bring it in a vacuum, he brings it for a few interesting statements he makes before that are quite radical if you think about it. The first thing is, the issue is about if you only have money to buy one candle, and it's Shabbos and it's Hanukkah, what should you use the candle for? A Shabbos candle or a Hanukkah candle? So you'd think the argument could be made Hanukkah, because Shabbos is 52 times a year. Sometimes you could say the novelty should take precedent. Shabbos you'll always have next week. Hanukkah only comes once a year.
But Shabbos was commanded by God.
Okay, so Maimonides says that the reason is that because Shabbos brings shalom bayis, peace at home, harmony at home. Whereas Hanukkah has great virtue, it brings Pesum and Nissa, it publicizes the miracle. So because shalom bayis, because of peace is more powerful than everything else. And then he brings something even more powerful. He says, that God says, and I've used this many times in couple therapy and in counseling people. God says, erase my name in order to preserve the peace between a husband and a wife. There's a law in the Torah, in the laws of Seta. I'm going into all the details, it's complicated laws, but bottom line is that one of the signs to create peace between husband and wife, where there's some conflict or there's some accusations and so on, is to take the name of God and put it on in the mouth of the woman, and God, which is a desecration, because in the Torah it says, do not erase the name of God. God says, but I want my name to be erased if it's going to help preserve peace. Now this is a big thing if you think about it, because there are many ways that God could have figured out how to clarify that the woman did not betray her husband. He has to insist that you define literally one of the 10 commandments. To take God's name and obliterate it is one considered a grave sin. And God intentionally uses that as an example. What does it tell you? That if religion tears apart a couple, you have a big problem. If God says, erase my name in order to preserve peace, that means religion can never be the force that rips apart a couple. And I can tell you from my experience, though I cannot say it's 100%, and I haven't met every person, most conflicts in marriages are not because of religious reasons. That's a smokescreen. It's usually other things, and religion then becomes an issue because other things are an issue. Religion is a good scapegoat. But if a couple love each other, I've seen people love each other and their religious state is not exactly in the same place. I know people who are actually, one person keeps Shabbos and one does not. And still they're married to each other, they love each other because they do have real love. Will they ultimately come closer to? They have come closer. But this is a separate topic, I don't want to go into it right here. The point I was making was that you see here that God himself says, don't use me to destroy people. So someone that uses the name of God to destroy someone is antithetical to anything that the Torah represents. Abraham would be repulsed by it. Isaac, Jacob, Moses, no person in Torah would not be repulsed by it. The concept of a zealot that marches first to go kill others in the name of religion is not a Jewish concept. It's simply non-Jewish. As a matter of fact, the only time it ever happens is one exception, and it's a whole story. It's also not so simple. Pinchas did it. Pinchas, as a zealot, did something, and did it specifically without a court of law, without due process, and it's a whole issue. The Torah does not just take it lightly. It's not like, oh great, Pinchas did it, and let's find everyone should follow his path. You don't find exactly being advocated again. It had to happen that one time, and there's legitimacy for it, and Pinchas was the right person, because he was actually a person that did not have a zealous personality. If he had a zealous personality, he wouldn't have done the right thing. He actually was the opposite personality. So, but that again is another story. If you want to read more about that, I wrote once a whole article on that topic. But the point of the matter is, it's not an approach, and it's not a godly approach. God didn't create the universe for it to be destroyed. It says, I did not create a world for it to be chaotic. I wanted it to be civilized, transformed. Now, you could start invoking and saying, what about the times God brought a flood, and God destroyed Sodom, and so on and so forth. First of all, again, this is not maybe the place to discuss it. When God does it, it's one thing. But we should do it in the name of God. That's not the same thing. And even when God does it, it's also not that simple. Why would God create a universe to destroy it? It doesn't make any sense. So there has to be some deeper reason going on. Again, this is not the place for this discussion. The point of the matter is that the whole challenge that Abraham had, and that's what Abraham taught, was how do we reconcile God with this universe? Not how we destroy the universe by God's laws. It says, V'chai b'hem, you should live by it, not die by them. Even in the Torah it says there are only 3 laws, there are 3 crimes where a person should die before they commit them. And what are they? Murder, incest, and idolatry, which has profound reasons for that as well. But everything else, even eating pork on Yom Kippur, is considered a mitzvah if it's going to save a life. Because saving a life is more important than that is the sanctity of the mitzvah of Yom Kippur if you can save a life. No one should ever have to rely on that. So the point I'm making here is that the whole process was about creating peace. Now what happened in Abraham's home, and then you'll understand how it evolves in the empires. What happened in Abraham's home was he had a son called Yishmael, who would become the progenitor, he's the ancestor of the Muslim Arab world. Yishmael had a half-brother, his name was Isaac. He would become the ancestor of the Jewish world. And they did not get along. Yishmael was aggressive, was very talented. As a matter of fact, was a person who knew how to pray. Yishmael is his name. God should listen. But he was too aggressive for this world in a way. Jode bakel v'yad kol boy means his hand was in everything and everything was his. Did not have any restraint. A wild man, Pera Adam. And Sarah had to teach Abraham, tell Abraham, and Abraham had to listen to Sarah as God told him to listen and send away Yishmael. Now what was it? Yishmael was the son of Abraham. Abraham was a great man. Yishmael was circumcised. Abraham must have taught him his teachings, his principles. He grew up in a home like Abraham. So what was missing there? Well, what was missing was no balance. He learned much from Abraham, but he did not know how to balance it with the world. It was like too much passion. And as a result, he was too aggressive and too destructive. Then comes another family. Isaac also has 2 sons. One is named Esav, and one is named Jacob, Yaakov. Here they're even closer. They're actually full brothers. They're twins, as a matter of fact. Like alter egos. And here too, what do you find? That Esav was too aggressive. Ish Milchama, Yedid Tzayid, he was a warrior. And Jacob was Ish Tom, Yeshiv Aholim was the scholar, the man of peace, the wholesome one. And they are at war. Their whole lives they're at war with each other. Not only their lives, even in their pregnancy they were at war. And the Torah says clearly, 2 nations are inside you. When Rebecca complained, why is her pregnancy difficult? God responds, there's 2 nations inside of you at odds with each other. Nations. This is not a Medrash, it's not a Zohar. The Torah itself says 2 nations. Which 2 nations? So it's very clear who would be the descendants of Esav would be. Esav's grandson was called Roimi. Rashi says that at the end of Vayishlach, Magdiel Zur Roimi, Rome, which means exalted actually. It means like Magdiel, like lofty, exalted. And Rome would give birth to the Christian world. So basically the Roman Western Christian world originate from Esav. And they would be at odds throughout history, just as the 2 brothers were, with Jacob, who's the father and ancestor of the Jewish people. So it shouldn't be so surprising that there has been a war between the Christians and the Jews for so long. As I said, only the last few centuries has it changed. And Yishmael is the third party in this picture. So you have here 3 sons. One becomes the ancestor of the Muslim Arab world, one becomes ancestor of the Jewish world, and one of the Roman Christian Western world. They were fighting then, and they're still fighting today. And what is the essence of the war? The essence of the war is balance. Esav too learned many things from Yitzchak. He wasn't just a simple guy, just dismiss him as a wicked person. He had many great strengths. Isaac wanted to bless him, as a matter of fact. And Isaac was one of the patriarchs. He was a godly man. He didn't make a mistake. So the commentaries and many explain what was his intentions when he wanted to bless Esav, and why did Rivka and Jacob overrule that. It's a whole other story. But the bottom line, Esav was not a pushover, so to speak. So you're talking about 3 powerful forces in history, and these forces began in the homes of Abraham in a microcosm. They were fighting then, and they're still fighting today. What's the root of the war? The root of the war is ultimately the bridging, the integration, what we call Hashem Echad. Will God will God be integrated in our lives or not? Most of us compartmentalize. God is in one place, and the rest of our lives is in another place. Once in a while, we dedicate weekends, Shabbos, Yom Kippur, or when we're in the mood, or we feel particularly superstitious or guilty, or responsible, so God suddenly makes a reappearance. But integration, that every second of the day you breathe what God wants, it's not something you're going to find so common. And this is across the board, whether someone looks religious or they don't look religious. Everyone's got the same problem, because nobody can see God. And God is not easily accessible. Some of us grew up in homes where we have more tradition, and we are more mechanical Jews, so we have the habits, the rituals. But that doesn't mean you're more godly. It just means you were programmed. You grew up with it. And everyone has this conflict, because the fact is, live a godly life requires hard work, and it never ends. Because this world is constantly seducing us and distracting us for its own agendas. All the time. It never stops. It's relentless. There's no such thing as the battle is over. Now you may wonder, so what's the point? The point is that this battle is exactly the way it was meant to be. It was meant to be a battle. And it was meant to be a battle that we could prevail on a personal level and on a global level. Now, the battle rages, as I said, individually, but also globally. The battles in the Middle East today, however the news reports them, that they don't like this president, that president, all get to the root of it. It's the battles between religion and modernity, one way or another. I'm not saying who's right or wrong. As a matter of fact, each one of them has a virtue. As I said earlier, who's more correct? The secular people who say don't kill us in the name of religion, or the religious people say kill everybody in the name of religion? They're both wrong. They both have some truth to what they have to say, but the methods are wrong. So you have Yaakov, so you have Abraham has a son Yishmael, you have Isaac has a son Esav, Yatzim Amenu, Esav. And then comes Jacob. And here is the key secret. It says, Yaakov asher pada es Avram, Yaakov who redeemed Abraham. So in Kabbalistic, Hasidic writings, it says that Jacob, Abraham is chesed, love. Isaac is gevura, discipline, and Yaakov is tiferes, harmony, balance, or beauty. You find this, they correspond to many things. They correspond to the three holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. They correspond to many threes that you'll find in the Torah and in tradition. These three, Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim, the three pillars upon which the world rests. One is Torah. One is Gemilas Chasadim. Gemilas Chasadim is good deeds. That's Chesed. That's Abraham. Avodah, Zutfilah, service is Gvura, is like the elevating the prayers that come from the bottom up. And Tiferes is Torah. Tiferes Zumat and Torah. Yaakov is the balance. Tiferes, balance. What is the contribution of Jacob that the other two did not have? Even though obviously Abraham and Isaac were quite perfect in many ways, but they still had they had progeny, they had children who did not have balance. They were lacking the balance. Abraham was a lot of love, and Isaac was a lot of discipline. And you need to have the third party, Yaakov, to fill the picture. So each one serves their role. Yaakov's role is Shalom, Emes, all these things what we call Midas Yaakov. The 3 meals on Shabbos is Abraham, Isaac, and the third meal, Nachla, Bli Mitzarim, called Ufaratzta, the one that is the most powerful, is Jacob. What is the secret of balance? The secret of balance is not compromise or weakness. It's what I said earlier, like with Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, an individual who knows how to, is confident enough, mature enough with their faith, that they know how to inspire others instead of destroying others. It's a secret of real coexistence. However, we sometimes confuse coexistence with weakness. People say, yeah, let everyone do whatever they like. That's also coexistence. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone who does not compromise their own integrity of their beliefs, and yet they can be a loving and inspiring force to others. Now, did Abraham have that? Of course Abraham and Isaac had elements of that. But Jacob, Yaakov, was the full embodiment of that approach, which is why he gave birth, mitase shlema, to a complete family that were all tzaddikim. They're all righteous. Just as a footnote, so then you ask how they sell their brother into slavery. It's a good question. So remember, for every answer there's a question. And we'll discuss that another time. But it still says that he had the family of the righteous. And as a result, that became the ancestors of the entire Jewish people. Now, where do we stand today? So, who has it right? I will not say here, even as a proud Jew, that the Jewish people are all living up to the legacy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with a full balance. We've got our own fights. Forget it. We have our own wars between us. Precisely the same type distrust, divisiveness between one community and the next. So that doesn't mean you have to wash your laundry in public. And obviously, I'm not comparing it. The fact that Jews fight with each other does not justify, and definitely is not going to be compared to people ready to bomb World Trade Centers and stuff like that. Thank God, Jewish divisiveness doesn't always take the shape of violence. Unfortunately, sometimes it does, but it's not that common. But it's still nothing to be proud of, because Barchenu Avinu Kolanu Ke'echad, we say that God's blessings rest with His peace and unity. So we talk about in our own family, the fighting, the infighting. It's really the same problem. What does it come down to? Insecure people don't know how to get along with each other. When you're insecure, and especially religious, you definitely cannot tolerate others. In other words, let's put it in simple English. If you have to be wrong for me to be right, is a fundamental problem. Why can't I be right without you being wrong? Why do I have to change your mind? Because I'm not so secure with my position, so therefore, as long as there's someone that's going to remind me there's another position, I'm not confident. Now, let's say I am right. Why do I have to prove that you're wrong? Maybe you have to do it through inspiring, through love. Who says it's about you? Who says it's about winning? This isn't like a corporate competition of McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's. Is Orthodox, conservative, and reform movement of 3 country clubs that are fighting who's going to dominate. If a person is truly a godly person, then what you care about is not yourself. You care about what the cause demands. The cause is not about who wins. The cause is what God's will in the matter. The famous classic story where the two women come to King Solomon with a baby, and each one claims the baby is theirs. So King Solomon in his wisdom says, cut the baby in half. And immediately one woman says, yeah, that's a good idea. And the other woman says, no, if you're going to do that, better the other woman should have. So of course he gave the child to this woman, because only a mother would never let her child be cut. So you think about it, why? The mother is ready for the child to grow up in a different family, a different home, but at least the child should survive. More important than the mother winning the child. No one should ever have to make such a decision, but think about that's what a dedication is. See, the selflessness of great people like Moses, for example, ready to sacrifice his own life. What do you need more than that? He says, erase my name from the book of life, the Torah, God's Torah, just to save another person, and people who were not, again, great tzaddikim, they made some big mistakes. These are unbelievable. These sacrifices means it's not about him. It's not about me winning. It's about what's right. That's a very rare, of course, specimen, but these are what true leaders are about. So the balance of Tiferes, which is lacking so much in our own circles, is because that's what we have. We have many groups. Every group thinks it's superior and does not understand the concept of maybe Ein Dei Sein Shava is the idea that God created people with diverse opinions. So whenever I say that to my zealous friends, they say to me, yeah, but what happens if they're wrong? So good, they have different opinions, but the opinion is an opinion, but if they're wrong. So I say, well, who decides who's wrong and who's right? They say the same thing about you. So of course, they right away get stuck, because my rabbis are definitely right. They heard it straight from God, and they went to the mikveh 3 times beforehand, so how could we be wrong? That type of approach. Now, I'm not trying to suggest they're not right. The question is, what's the approach to take? Let's say you are absolutely right. How do you teach that to other people? Do you go around with what do they call placards saying I'm right and you're wrong, or do you do it through love and inspiration? What happens if it was your own children who happen to have a little disagreement, and you're really a loving parent? Do you take a side, or you teach your children to figure out how to work it out, and without taking sides? You see, when there's real love and you care about it, like it's your own family, like your child, you treat it differently. But if it's not your child, if every Jew in this world would think like that, I speak now specifically about Jews, not even getting into the Middle Eastern picture. We'll get to that in a moment. If every Jew thought like that we're one family, and if 60 years ago we would all been on the same concentration camp, whether you were a Reform Orthodox, conservative, or an atheist, or an unbeliever, or the biggest zealot out there. Everybody was treated equal by the Nazis. And if we were able to apply that to ourselves today, that we are one family, and yes, there may be some who are wrong, some who are right, but that's not the point. The point is how do you inspire your own family? When you disagree with your brother, what do you do? If he's your brother or sister. So yeah, you can excommunicate him. You could say, I'm right, he's wrong, and I won't speak to him the rest of my life until he does what I think is right. Or maybe, first of all, to determine that you're right 100%. That's number one. And secondly, where's humility? And thirdly, even if you're 100% right, is that the approach? You think you're going to win because by telling him he's wrong all the time? If it was really your brother and you had true healthy love, that's not the approach of a healthy person. I've never seen healthy people behave that way. Unhealthy people behave that way. And then, of course, they call everybody else unhealthy except themselves. It's also, you know what they say, in insane asylums, everybody thinks they're normal there. That's how it works. And since I'm not mentioning names, there's no Lashon Hara involved, so I can't be sued for this, which is good news, I guess. But to go back now, why did I begin with the Jewish people? You know, you could say, what do we care about that? Why are we talking about the Jews when the Egyptians are the ones that are right now demonstrating? Because I'll tell you, first of all, everything is a microcosm, macrocosm. Do you think that we Jews have always believed that when you change something in your own life, it has some impact on the larger world? So don't think that the peace between God and the universe is just something for everyone else except Jews. You know, we have a lot to say about that. There's no question in my mind that if Israel had its act together and they found their balance between these two forces, it would make a major impact that in the entire region, the entire world for that matter. Because the fact is, the non-Jewish world, whether they like it or not, whether they acknowledge it or not, half of that world worships Jews. They worship a Jew. His name is Jesus. So they worship a Jew. Good. We don't worship that Jew because we don't worship each other, but they do. So that's number one. Secondly, they see the Torah as their Bible as well. So they may hate the Jews, but they respect them, and they look to them as to be a light unto nations. Now, how many Jews can you point to that are a light unto nations? Let's define that if Jews were living up to their mandate, what kind of world we would live in today. That just planted the seed. Now, as far as what's going on in the Middle East, the truth is, it's the same battle, but on a much broader scale, obviously, because it's true. As I said, Christians terrorized the world in the name of their religions. So did the Muslims. The Jews never did that. And just as a footnote, you may ask, well, what's the Loisa Chaya Kol Neshama when the Jews went into Israel, when they had promised land? I'm not going to answer that here, but if you want the answer to that, I wrote a whole bunch of articles on that too. I'm just preempting all the problems here. We've covered that ground. But to go back to so they terrorized the world, and they had to get tamed. The Christians, to some extent, did get tamed. This country is a shining example that we Jews especially have to thank for opening its doors to us, a country where we can live peacefully and practice whatever we'd like to practice, send our children to any school we like. It's not to be taken for granted because it's not something that was common in history. This is completely unprecedented in the last few decades. But on the other end of things, the Muslim, as I said, world, I don't know whether they're 12th century or they're in the 15th century, but and because we see with Twitter and Facebook, things can accelerate, just like they can get them out into the streets. Maybe the evolution and the taming of fundamentalist Islam can also accelerate. And I have no doubt that it could. But it's critical to put things in perspective. That's why I get infuriated when I read Thomas Friedman, for example. Smart man, but arrogant, who's so convinced that he thinks he's right in the way that Israel should not look at all the events in the Middle East as affecting it. It's simply make peace with the Palestinians, as if they want peace, as if they want Israel to be there. If anything, Egypt proved that you could buy 30 years of peace, but it's only 30 years. Now, it's a lifetime for many of us, but 30 years is nothing in the scheme of things. As I mentioned what Chow and Lai said, it's too early to tell. And, money runs out. And anger, the Americans also once planted a lot of money in Iran, the Shah, before it became what it became. So you're dealing with a region that the It's a combustion chamber that's going to explode one way or another. And it's beginning to explode. Hopefully it will be with the least amount of pain and blood. But until we get wise to understand the real forces at work and just try to find another Band-Aid, we can buy a little time. But as a Jew and a proud Jew, as I said, sitting here and reading this week's chapter about the empires and about Abraham's vision of the empires, I cannot, I feel simply obligated in a way, and I feel responsible to share. There is a big picture here. It's a picture that started thousands of years ago, and it's a continuum. And if you really look into it, you'll see the continuum is very, very obvious. And if you want to know anything else, just read a little Muslim theology, and it'll remind you very quickly of what's going on. Now, the Western world is an interesting phenomenon because it's, as I said, given us prosperity, comforts, but faith and God are big trouble in this part of the world. You know, in the other part of the world, they're also in trouble, but there's the other extreme. Like I said before, it's too much fire. Here, there's too little fire. So we have to find some balance. Now, practically, it ultimately comes down to this. We don't have to be concerned, in my opinion, because as God told Abraham, you will be enslaved by a land that's not your own, but you will come out with great treasures. There's no question, as it says the Medrash in this week's chapter, that the oil lamp will ultimately prevail over all the empires and all their battles. But that doesn't mean it won't be painful in between. So I think what we're obligated to do is, number one, is to be clear about these ideas and share them, because most people have no clue. We get so overwhelmed by the moment, and especially when you have it streamed to you all day and all night, 24/7, whether it's cable or internet or Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is. It just, in a way, it amplifies the moment, and very hard to see the bird's eye view. So technology could also become our undoing because it amplifies everything. You know, like if you're afraid for a moment, then you see 1 million people afraid, it just makes it worse. But there's another way to look at it. There's a big picture that's evolving. And we're seeing one step of it, one piece of it. People who are wise knew this 30 years ago when the peace treaty with Egypt was signed. They saw this is not, it's you give land and you get a paper in return. The land you can't get back, and the paper can always change, like we see now. And it will change, there's no question about it. Now hopefully it will change in a way that will not be will not be bloody. Israel is a strong country, but and that's what I would suggest to my colleague Thomas Friedman and some others to think about. It's not about creating more distrust in the region. It's just being realistic. You have to know what you're dealing with. You have to know that yes, maybe you bought time, but if somebody wants your living room, the fact that you gave them your dining room is not going to be very helpful down the line. Now, what is the ultimate approach? I think the big picture is definitely a type of light unto nations. Until Israel does not show that it is a leader of morality and spirituality and godliness, the Muslim world will never respect it. Because it thinks it is superior to Israel in the area of morality and spirituality. That's really... But this you're never going to hear, because this is so politically incorrect what I just said. People say, yes, some religious fanatic just said that. But I'm not saying from a religious fanatic point of view. To me, it's so obvious. It's very obvious what's going on there. Why would a Muslim world that's so committed to bringing God into this universe want to cede land to a secular Israel? I'd like to know. Why should they? I remember I wrote an article, 5-6 years ago, maybe less, and I opened it with a question. Here was a quote. Israel does not deserve its land because it's not ready to fight for it. Some quote like that. And it was a multiple choice question. Who said that? So, I brought all kinds of options. Rav Kook, the Satmar Rebbe, Lubavitch Rebbe, this one, that one, that one. Well, how would you like to know that? You know who said that? This was a quote from an Al-Qaeda newspaper. They write that in an article, which I got translated from Arabic to English. I don't read Arabic, just for the record. And they basically say exactly what I quoted before with Khatab, that Israel does not deserve the Holy Land that God promised it because they're not ready to fight for it for the right reasons. They're ready to fight for some land, but they're not ready to fight for God, basically. Can you imagine? Your enemy is telling you that you don't deserve it for that reason. I found that to be very disturbing and ironic. Now, I still don't agree with them. It's none of their business. Jews are living there and that's it. Too bad. But it's interesting how they look at it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting there isn't anti-Semitism and they wouldn't find some other excuse. But I'm telling you, there's no question in my mind that if Israel served as that light unto nations, what America is trying to do, and maybe will never do, we'd have a different landscape. But this isn't an overnight type of thing. Right now Israel is controlled mostly by firefighters and administrators who are trying to just, buy time. And whatever, nobody knows what's going to be in 10 years from now. Nobody's got a 5-year plan. Forget about a 10-year plan. And I'm not saying this to be negative, it's just observation. So we're in a situation where on one hand it's a mess, and the only thing you can really turn to is the big picture. There is a big picture here. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that light is not like the pessimist tells us, the light of the oncoming train. The light at the end of the tunnel is an actual light. It's like an exit, not an exit, a way out of this mess. So I think each of us are responsible to read, inform ourselves about this, what's going on, because it's only going to get more lively. Let's put it that way. There's no question. It's not dying down. It's going to create probably ripples through the whole Middle East. Egypt is a big country, and it's going to be a lot of realignment of stuff. Now, obviously, the first reaction is going to be from all the so-called leaders is, how do we create new band-aids and how do we adjust quickly? They're not going to accept any paradigm shifts or any true changes. So you buy a little more time, but that still doesn't. The word does not absolve us from the obligation to try to understand these things as best as possible, to know there's something we can do about it, maybe not directly in a political sense, but indirectly in our own lives, microcosm, macrocosm, and above all, give each other and our families and children strength to know that the vision of Abraham lives on. These episodes were foretold, the battles have been fought, and we're here to talk about it. So that should give us some strength. We say Passover by the Seder, V'hi sha'am delanu, that what's V'hi? V'hi is the promise, He is faith, however you interpret, V'hi sha'am delanu. It stood with us and withstood all the enemies who tried to destroy us from every generation, starting from Egypt and through all the empires. And we're still here. So the Jews are a good example, not just for Jews, but also for the entire world, of what it means to be at the edge of the abyss and come through and survive and thrive. Not like that communist leader who said, yesterday we stood at the edge of the abyss and today we took a large step forward. We're talking about going through the abyss and coming out stronger than ever. And coming out stronger as a result. As they say, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. So, on a personal note, I think that I after September 11th, I wrote a few articles about the microcosm of these empires, what they mean in our own personal lives. Based on the principle, as I said earlier, that when you change a little thing in yourself, in some way it impacts the larger world. So we can do many different things, and if you'd like some stuff from writing about it, just to complement what I've said here, compliment I mean with an E, not with an I, to support what I've said here, I'll be happy to send it to you if you send me an email. So, what they say, Oit Chazain Lamoyed means there's more to come, plenty more action to happen, I'm sure, in the next days and weeks. As I said, hopefully, and I have no doubt that God will be merciful and it should all come peacefully and with least bloodshed, and maybe it will be a little wake-up call that money doesn't buy everything. But at the same time, America with its money, if it also added some higher standards, wouldn't hurt. But I don't know about that. I don't know how much confidence I have in that. So good. So Egypt's in the news again. The land of the pharaohs is back in the headlines. So we've been there, right? We managed. Let me just conclude on a personal note. Again, this is we're here tonight, and tomorrow night Philip will be giving his class 7 p.m. Am I right about that? Yeah. Okay. Good. And it's always an honor and pleasure to speak to you, to share a journey called life. We intersect And please see me as a friend that in any way I can help or support you in any way, please. And I hope we can look at each other reciprocally in that way. And everyone should have I'll be happy to take some questions if you like. And everyone should have an excellent evening and great week.
I look at the